Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out and get to the first question. Alright. Jason, in certain circumstances, for example, hard gainers who struggle with low appetite, could it be reasonable to dirty bulk to a degree to get enough calories in? Thanks. Tough question to answer, and the only reason it's tough to answer is that people don't have a definition of dirty bulking, meaning there's so many different definitions of it that it's hard to say. For one person, it could mean eating a lot of fat. For another person, it could mean eating a lot of refined foods. And so stating what the correct answer is really difficult there. Now, will I say that at times is it necessary for the hard gainer to do a dirty bulk if we define a dirty bulk as a diet in which you are likely to gain additional body fat? The answer would be yes. They may have to eat foods that are more likely to be stored as body fat, and that usually includes very high satiety foods, and particularly foods that are high in fat. Those are the foods you're most likely to store as additional body fat. And the reason for that is that, again, it's usually about caloric intake. A lot of hard gainers, and this is what I describe as a hard gainer, is someone who struggles to eat enough to gain weight. In some cases, they struggle to eat enough to maintain weight. Well, foods that are easier to overeat and easier to store as fat tend to be, well, a solution to that problem. So not only does it help bypass their appetite issue, there's also the factor that any sort of long-term muscle gain, meaning something beyond sometimes a recomp, any sort of appreciable muscle gain at a certain threshold, you are going to reach a point in your gains without drugs, and in many cases even with drugs, to where, depending upon what your level of leanness is, where you're stalling with muscle gains, it may be necessary to gain body fat. It might be necessary to gain significant amounts of body fat, sometimes more than 5 pounds, over a course of time, in order to gain or accrue appreciable amounts of new muscle mass. So when you look at it from that perspective, particularly for the person who struggles with overeating, a dirty bulk may be necessary, yes, and it will probably be necessary for them to gain additional muscle. And I think it's oftentimes the case for the noob who's trying to get past their noob gains. And what people need to understand when you say that, we're not talking about someone getting fat and staying fat for 10 years. We're not talking about people harming their health. We're saying, look, there might be a period of time to where the skinny undereater, in order to gain all of his noob gains, may need to put on 10 or 15 pounds of extra body fat over the course of a year to finish out all of his noob gains, to finish milking the gains out of any sort of linear progression that he might be making, and then he can trim the extra body fat off later. And I can tell you right now, if you're very, very physically active and you're young and healthy, gaining 10 to 15 pounds of body fat, unless you're already obese, is not going to significantly affect your health, particularly if you trim it off at a later date. So from that perspective, yes, for the novice to get beyond being anything but a skinny, weak novice, they may need to go on what some people would classify as a dirty bulk for about 6 months or 9 months or a year. Yeah, it might actually be necessary. All right, next question. So, I've been smashing through your novice 5x5. Squat and deadlift are going great. Bench not so well, but it's okay. However, I just want to ask what I can do about my hips shooting up first on my squat. I know it's due to weak quads. Anything in particular I can do to address this? And I want to thank you for bringing pause reps into my life, as they have drastically improved my flexibility and power out of the bottom. If your hips are shooting up, it's a technique issue. It's not so much weak quads. It's a technique issue. I don't have an issue with my hips shooting up right now, and my quads are absolutely the weak link in my squat. I went pretty much 2 years without squatting, and I continue to do heavy deadlifting. My back can easily handle anything I can load on it with a squat, right? My quads are my weak link. I don't have my back shoot up. You need to fix the technique on your squat. It's as simple as that. Your technique is bad. Your technique needs to be corrected. You need to figure out what's going on with your squat. Learn how to squat correctly, and your hips will stop shooting up. And that's going to require you to reduce the weight a little bit. You are going to have to reduce the weight down to a point to where you can train without your hips shooting up first, so that everything comes up simultaneously, so that your torso and your hips come up at the same time. And it could be the amount of forward lean you have on it. You might actually find that with the style of squatting you're doing, you may not have quite enough forward lean at the start. Again, you might be trying to stay too upright, and then you end up having your hips shoot up, and then your torso gets too far over, and then readjusts afterwards. So again, you're going to have to play with your technique. You're going to have to reduce the weight slightly and sort that out, fix it, and then go back to progressing. All right, next question. Hey, Jason. Big fan. I've been cutting and recomping since I started lifting 5 months ago. I was 185 pounds at 25+% body fat at 6 foot, 18 years old. I'm now 187 at about 17% body fat. My deadlift mixed grip is 405, squat 352, bench press 192.5, and overhead press is 121 pounds. More of an effort and technique problem here, which is being addressed. Since my bench is lacking so far behind and I want to continue cutting, should my programming be different for my push movements? Currently, I am running your Ice Cream Fitness 5x5. Recovery is not a problem despite my caloric restrictions. Any help is greatly appreciated. Keep up the great work, Coach. You know what, brother, at this point, you might want to ease into an intermediate program. And when you ease into an intermediate program, there's where you're going to find your solution. Your solution is going to be with how you prioritize things. Because your deadlift and your squat are both a little bit ahead of all your pressing, you could prioritize pressing on any sort of intermediate program that you do. Most of them allow for some sort of template that allows for prioritization and accessories to get your pressing up to speed. Because it sounds like your recomp has gone really, really well. It sounds like squat and deadlift have obviously done better than all your pressing, but it's also important to remember that you have recompositioned, not bulked. And because you've done that, the lack of weight gain can contribute to the pressing stalling a little bit. And that's okay. That's okay, because your pressing isn't bad. To be honest, I mean, what you lift on all your lifts right now for a guy who weighs 187 is pretty decent. I would say that you're no longer a novice at this point. You probably really aren't. You could ease into some sort of intermediate program that can address the deficiencies in your pressing strength as you continue on this journey. I think you've already built a decent starting base, and you could go ahead and move into some other sort of program. All right, next question. Hey, Jason. I've realized that since I started using heavier weights on the deadlift, I've been needing several seconds in between reps to reset and get mentally ready for the next rep. Like 5 or 6 seconds on the last 1 to 2 reps of a 5-rep set. Is this fine, or do I need to stop doing this? You know what? Deadlift rep work, what you need to remember, don't worry about such nonsense like metabolic fatigue and tension and all that stuff on deadlifts. Deadlifting is about getting the weight up using good technique, good form, all right, without hurting yourself. On the deadlift, if you need 5 seconds between every single rep to reset, get everything positioned, to get tight, to get yourself ready to do it, then you do whatever it takes. If it takes you 5 seconds, it takes you 5 seconds. I would much rather see a lifter, particularly if they're going to be cranking out a full 5 reps on a deadlift instead of just doing 1 to 3. I would much rather see them execute 5 perfect reps, with 85% of their max, than for them to rush it and have sloppy reps. I would much rather see them lift more weight for the total set with perfect form, even if it requires longer breaks. I think you're going to get more out of it than if you tried to rush it and it start costing you performance or you see technique break down. It's not a big deal. It's not, you do what you need to do to make those reps perfect. And if you need 5 seconds, then you need 5 seconds. It beats the alternative. All right, next question. Coach, in your opinion, what is the best way to cut and maintain strength or even gain strength in other areas, diet and programming wise? The best way is going to be to get your diet dialed in perfect and to lose weight very, very slowly. What you need to remember as far as maintaining strength, or particularly any sort of recomp, to do it effectively, weight loss needs to be slow. In other words, don't rush your cut. Don't run a large caloric deficit. Pay very close attention to things like protein intake. Again, if you're trying to make any sort of recomposition happen, maybe a little more protein might be a better idea. Maybe replacing some fat calories with some protein might be a good idea. Again, carbs and protein tend to be your friends more than fat when performance and maximizing every calorie towards maintaining or gaining muscle mass come into the picture. So for someone who's trying to lose body fat and keep all of their strength and all of their muscle, cutting as slow as possible and getting your diet dialed in perfectly becomes very important. And it also becomes very important for you to not exceed your maximum recoverable volume in the gym. So again, if anything, dialing back your training volume a hair and losing weight a little slower is probably the best approach for this. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.